Hi, and welcome to another session on the Kalicube Summit 2026. I'm here with Laurence O'Toole from Authoritas. Hi, Laurence. How are you?
Laurence O'Toole from Resolve AI now.
Excuse me.
Yeah, no, I'm really well. Thank you very much. Pleased to be
So tell
here
me about
today.
Resolve AI and why it's not Authoritas anymore.
So Resolve AI is a UK headquartered NASDAQ-listed technology business, which is in the e-commerce space, providing solutions for major retailers worldwide. It has an array of capabilities covering data enrichment, its own proprietary large language models tuned for e-commerce, and a tech suite which covers search, discovery, recommendations, on-site, and conversational commerce, and even a reward and loyalty business, putting banks and their customers together with retailers. So it covers all aspects of e-commerce buyer journey, from acquiring customers through converting and retaining them. And obviously, an SEO, AEO business like ours is very much focused on how do we get more eyeballs on the brand and its products and services. And we've worked with them and their clients for many years. So it's a good home and a good fit. And so I'm pleased to be here today to talk about measurement and how it's changing in the AI space, and where I see it going, and the kind of things that all businesses, not just retailers, should be considering.
Yeah. Well, one of the things I really wanted to talk with you about was your methodology, because I wrote an article on Search Engine Ads arguing that we have to move from micro measurement to macro measurement, that in the SEO world of SERPs, we could measure at micro with the click and the blue link and the ranking, and that in a world where the assistive agents and the assistive engines are opaque and that everything is increasingly personalized, and ads appear in Gmail and potentially suggestions and recommendations appear in Google Docs or in Teams, and we've had that example in the past. How do we measure this?
That's a big question. So
I started with the biggest question I could think of.
Fundamentals. So I think the future is conversational. Let's start there. So if you look at Google, they are disrupting themselves. I mean, introducing AI overviews, introducing AI mode. They've seen the threat posed by ChatGPT and others, and have responded accordingly. In a way that they put the user first, and to come up with these solutions, and worked out how they monetize it later. And so they disrupt themselves. And the reason why is because in many instances, a conversational interface is a better experience for the user. And this is happening not just in search, out on the major search engines and chatbots, but also it's having a knock-on impact on other surfaces. So when people arrive at retailers' stores, for example, they're expecting that kind of enhanced experience where they can, search and give and share more context about what they're looking for, and get a better answer than long lists of category pages full of similar products. So I think conversational search is pervasive, not just in terms of search engines and AI chatbots, which we talk about all the time, but also across other surfaces, websites and apps. And consumers are sharing more context than ever before. So, if we look at long tail searches in Google, you can see that over time, the number of keywords that consumers are using has grown. But if you look at research published by ChatGPT, some data we analyzed on Grok, it was something like 75 to 85% of searches were greater than 10 words. Couple this with tool sharing, memory, remembering previous conversations and context, you can see that the chat interfaces are getting much more context and can then understand the user intent much better and give consumers a much better experience. So that's the sort of the underpinnings of what's going on. And how does that affect measurement? Well, it means that in a world of SEO, we used to measure, there's 15,000 searches a month for trail running shoes or electric drills or robot lawnmowers or whatever it might be. And you'd prioritize your actions and your marketing, your SEO work around keywords that were the greatest search volume, the greatest potential for your business. I think in terms of large language models, what we're seeing is, yes, users are sharing more context. Those conversations are very, very unique. And most of those search volumes have a search volume of one. And so the actual demand for the products and services won't necessarily have changed. And we've certainly seen that in many instances, AI search is additive to SEO in terms of Google search volumes. The query volumes have stabilized or maintained their levels, if not gone up slightly, according to Google. And you've got all this AI search on top. So users are using multiple services for different purposes. And you need to understand that. So that means now, in terms of measurement, you need to understand how you're performing across a range of surfaces, not just Google, but Google, how am I performing in AI overviews? What happens if someone searches in AI mode? I need to check ChatGPT. What happens in Perplexity? What happens if someone uses Gemini? What happens if someone uses Claude, etc.? So you've got multiple more. Sorry, I didn't mention Bing. I should mention Bing, obviously, as well. And so with Copilot. So people are using more surfaces for different purposes, and that context may vary from B2B to B2C, of course. So depending on your audience, you need to select your models. You can get some clues as to which models to check from looking at your analytics referral data, looking at your logs, and seeing who's visiting you and what type of bots are visiting you. And that all being said, it's the question then of what do you measure? Because the surfaces you want to measure your performance across, but it's actually what do you measure and how do you go about measuring it? What technology do you need to have in place? So the first thing is prompts. So no AI platforms are actually sharing user conversations. I mean, there's been a few leaked, but not deliberately. There's no equivalent of Google Search Console. There's no equivalent of a useful sort of source of data via an ad performance system. So really, what do you do? You could use clickstream data. Some tool providers out there provide some sort of clickstream data. Others mine, people also ask, or forums. You need to build a representative prompt set. So for me, I think one of the biggest issues facing the industry at the moment is there is a lot of hype going around this kind of stuff. People are saying they've got hundreds of millions of conversations and they're using clickstream data, or they've got prompt volumes. Most of it, to me, how do I politely say this? It doesn't ring true.
No.
So, if the AI models aren't sharing data on conversations and volumes of conversations, how do you build a mathematical model and know it's reliable? If you've got nothing to benchmark it against, there's a lot of guesswork involved in that. So I think as an industry, we're still stuck with sort of using tools like Google Trends or Google AdWords search volumes. So obviously, given its market share, it's a useful indicator of where the demand is. But you've actually got to build a prompt set that's relevant if you're tracking to your audience. And clickstream data can be biased, it can be incomplete, doesn't cover all the key factors. So I like to look at a business and look at its lines of business. Let's take an e-commerce store, for example. We could look at it.
Sorry, just to cut in there.
Yeah.
I was about to say, how do you define what the queries are that you're tracking, the prompts are that you're tracking? And I mean, I've seen the Authoritas interface, and it is super interesting that you can do it in many different ways. What I've done is built what I call the funnel query pathway, and it's to identify the bottom of funnel query that would be perfect from our ICP. And it's not a query they would necessarily ask, but it's the one that we know is the perfect question for the perfect client just before they convert. And then we build up from there and say, well, let's identify 4 middle of funnel queries that would naturally lead to that. And then the top of the funnel queries that would lead to the middle of funnel queries. And then you've got a pathway, and then we build multiple pathways.
Yeah, I think that's a good way as any of looking at it. I mean, I think first of all,
well, you could have said it was a brilliant way of looking at it.
No, I think it is a good way, and it's one of the ways in which we can look at it. I think that's what I would say. So
I think that's the point. The point I wanted to get across is that everybody has to have the methodology. The methodology has to make sense and be founded in something that makes sense to the business. But we're all going to have different methodologies now because it's all going to have to be macro.
Yeah. So I think there's a number of different methodologies you could adapt, and as I said before, it might depend, on your context, whether it's B2C or direct to consumer or business to business, etc. So for me, my starting point is we look at prompt families. And so a lot of the tools out there, you can build your own DIY thing, tools if you like, or pay for tools. They'll allow you to check like 10 prompts or 100 prompts or something, and it gives you like a tiny taste of what might be going on. But it's not enough, and it's not consistent enough, and it's not methodical enough. And for me, it's all about building a research framework. And you may just want to research your unbranded performance. So when my brand is not mentioned across my lines of business, my categories, clothing, menswear, shoes, etc., I might want to just understand for unbranded queries across the buyer journey from top of funnel to bottom of funnel, how am I performing? And our system can generate those type of prompts based on specifically on your business and the context you give it. You might also be interested in your brand for obvious reasons, and how that changes when your brand is mentioned. And so you can replicate that set across your lines of business or categories and subcategories, and say for the key factors, commercially grounded factors that consumers find important, what criteria they use when they're choosing products and services, how am I performing? And when my brand is mentioned, what's the sentiment? And what we found in our research is that even when you use branded queries with large language models, they recognize consumers like to window shop, and so they will return multiple brands. So in most instances, they will still return your brand that you've asked the question about, plus a couple of alternatives. So I mean, this is something that Google has recognized for years in their quality ratings guidelines, that people like to window shop. So, that applies to measurement, because you need to think about getting shortlisted, not necessarily about your rankings, which I'm sure we'll come to in a second. So just on the prompt family perspective, I would think most people think, oh, how am I doing for unbranded queries? But I think you need to go a step beyond that and think about your brand and what it's saying about your brand, how relevant your brand is. Is it recognized as an entity for the type of topics and concepts that you want to be recognized for across all models? And you can even go beyond that, and you can frame a set of questions negatively. So you could look at airlines and what's important for short haul and long haul airlines, for example, and you go, oh, well, it's in-flight service, and it's price, and it's convenience, and luggage and allowance and what have you. And those criteria are important to consumers when making the decisions. Then you can frame the questions negatively and discover what large language models are saying about your brand when clients are complaining about issues or have questions about reliability or whatever it might be. So, and you can even explore head-to-heads against competitors. Frame a set of questions that says, I'm looking to fly from London to New York. Should I fly A, British Airways, or B, Virgin? And then frame it the other way around, A, Virgin, or B, British Airways. And then what you'll find across models is certain models like Perplexity always recommends Virgin. And so there are some inherent biases in how these models have been trained and how they set up, which inevitably will give different answers for the same questions to different users across different surfaces. So there's so much to explore. And I think you've just got to take a market research framework to it and say, look, let's build a research framework that is reliable, so I can communicate internally to my management team and the C-level execs and say, this is how we're performing. You need to understand large language models are volatile. They don't always return the same results for even the same question. And so over time, what we're going to do is we'll build a research framework, just like we might do research studies every quarter in the street and ask people about unbranded awareness, for example. We're going to do a research study. It's going to look like this. It's going to cover our key lines of business. It's going to cover the key commercial factors that consumers find important when buying our goods and services. It's going to cover the buyer journey. It's going to cover our key personas. That is a large prompt set. And then you need to check that regularly. And for me, that
I was going to say
ideally would be daily, but
there were a couple of things. Number one is you kept going, and you can do this, and you can do that, and you can do that. And you think, well, there's going to be a gazillion prompts, and that becomes unmanageable, or maybe not unmanageable, but certainly you're losing your focus. And what you're saying is treat it as market research, as though you're asking people in the street, which I quite like as an analogy.
Yeah, well, it's if you look at it, sort of branded awareness, unbranded awareness across different categories, you can measure that. So you ask most large language models, name an electric car brand, and I'm sure that they're all going to come back with Tesla. And then mostly they'll also come up with other brands as well, but then occasionally another brand will randomly pop into that answer. And the order of that the answer will be different. The makeup of the answer will be different in terms of the text. So that's why you can't look at, when you're measuring, you've got to think about where you're measuring. We've covered the surfaces, what you're measuring, so the prompts and the orchestration of those prompts. And then the frequency of sort of how often you measure is really important. So we've done a research study of 3,000 prompts across 10 categories, lots of different types of questions, transactional information, factual, etc., across all the main models, scraping the UI via the APIs. And what we found for unbranded prompts is if you measured daily and took a 7-day window, 45% of the brands that appear are one-hit wonders. They just come in once, okay? 7%, for this is for unbranded queries, are what I call default choice, ever present. And that's kind of where you want to be, clearly. You want to be the brand that every single day, no matter when you ask, you'll mention Tesla electric cars, you know. And so what I like to look at is you want to track a large prompt set daily, ideally. Okay. So not like, this is where it differs from sort of SEO and keyword rank tracking, where people would track some keywords daily, some weekly, some monthly. If you just check weekly, what you'll see is you know, on a given day, a chunk of brands or websites that are cited might just disappear from the response on the day you check. And then it might be there the next day. So unless you're checking that consistently and then effectively analyzing and averaging across that period, you might pick a good day, you might pick a bad day, but you don't know which. So you've got to track it consistently. I would favor a larger prompt set and doing research windows and then coming back to it and then taking action on that, and maybe then taking a smaller subset of that and say, well, we're going to focus on this. Let's check that daily whilst we're optimizing for it, then go back and do our periodic evergreen analysis again. So it just depends on your budget and your appetite and how aggressive you want to be for this. Right now, obviously AI traffic is a small percentage of overall traffic to websites and a small percentage of conversions. So it's probably less than 1 or 2% for most websites, but it's growing. And clearly the future is agentic and conversational, as we started from. So, you know, this is about readiness and being ready for, you know, what's coming in the next 12 months, 18 months, 36 months, probably sooner than we think. And you want to make sure that you've got a methodical, robust, defensible, explainable methodology, so that when your CEO says, well, hang on a second, I didn't see it. Well, yeah, large language models are volatile, they'll change. But what we're doing is we're taking a methodical research approach. And this is wave 1 and wave 2, and then eventually you'll be on wave 20. And you know, it gives you some reliable data, some solid foundations on which you can base your strategy. And so for me, measurement goes into strategy. It's hard to talk about strategy when you're talking about measurement. And so what I like to call is like the LLM ladder strategy. So in an ideal world, we would be the default choice, appearing 7 out of 7 times, if I was measuring it over a week, every single day, for all the prompts that are relevant to my business at all stages of the buyer journey. But inevitably, that's just not realistic.
Yeah.
And large language models show different types of sites, different types of citations for different types of queries. So what you can do, though, is you've stratified your questions in a way that you understand where the prompts live, they're tagged and organized accordingly. You can start to understand the groups of prompts. So let's just say it's, you know, maneuverability for a robot lawnmower is a really important key factor. You've got a set of prompts around that. And actually in that one, you're just emerging. You're appearing 3 or 4 times out of 7, every 7 times. And so, you know, you need to take some action on there. In other categories, you might be a challenger and you're appearing 5 or 6 times out of 7. In others, you might have minimal presence or be entirely absent. So you can segment the data that you've got back from the large language models, and you can get a picture of where you're the default choice or where you're entirely absent or where you're on that continuum somewhere in between, and you can take action accordingly. You can understand how concentrated the competition is, because actually you've got 4 brands that are always the default choice and it's been really hard to break into, or actually it's quite fragmented and no one seems to be the default choice whatsoever. You can get a much better understanding of the websites that are consistently cited as well, which helps you refine your list for outreach and partnership purposes. You can better understand if your content is being consistently cited as well, or your competitors' content, and which type of content wins consistently over time. All of that plays into your strategy. So for me, it's, which surfaces, what type of prompts, getting into the structure, the research around the prompts, and then the frequency gives you, if you understand volatility and you can measure it in the right way, then you can build yourself a robust set of data on which you can build a strategy to improve your positioning for short to long term performance.
Brilliant. And I mean, kind of what I love in what you just said is measurement is now indissociable from strategy. And the two need to go hand in hand. And setting up today your methodology and your tracking is going to give you a foundation in the next quarters to come. But your methodology and your data collection and the way you collect it and how you frame it, like market research, is only comparable to itself. So I wouldn't be able to compare my company to another company if we're not using the same methodology. And that's going to be a problem, because bosses always want to know how they're performing vis-a-vis the competition. Yeah,
I mean, obviously, if you're taking a robust sample size, like doing market research in the street, if you ask 10 people, it's not going to be as useful for you as if you ask 1,000 people, but you can't ask 1 million people. So you have to take a sample size, and within that sample, and you've described your research methodology and what you're covering and what you're not covering, importantly.
Yes.
You can say, actually, based on this is what we're seeing, and these are the competitors we're seeing. Now, yes, a competitor might take a different perspective, but they probably look at their business slightly differently to you anyway. No two retailers, e-commerce sites are absolutely identical. They don't always have the same taxonomies, even though they sell very similar products. So, it's all of this plays into, your strategy. Measurement isn't devoid from anything else. You need to think about the commercial realities. And so I might have this big evergreen perspective of how we're doing, but actually, my commerce team is telling me we need to shift all these overcoats because it's a heat wave in the UK right now. We need to sell them as quickly as possible. And how can we do that across not just organic channels or AI, but obviously paid and email and all the rest of it. So, so I certainly see measurement and strategy as the two go hand in hand, because at the end of the day, it's what's your goal? And your goal is not to get ranked number one. I mean, did I say that as an SEO for 20 years?
No, it often has been in the minds of SEOs, is ranking number one is my goal, because that shows that I'm doing my job as opposed to actually making money.
Yeah, and it feels almost choked saying that, but it's your goal is to get shortlisted, because large language models, the order of those results is going to change, but consistently, am I appearing in the answer and being mentioned? And whether that's, as it's any type of entity. We're tracking brand mentions, we track people, as you can also track products, and when the products are shown in carousels, you can link to merchants. And if you scrape the network requests behind ChatGPT, for example, you can understand the nature of that relationship between products and merchants, which ones have the best price tag, the star ratings, the availability, all this good stuff. So there's much more to meet the eye than just brand tracking unbranded prompts. And you can learn a lot more about what large language models think about your business and your presence in the marketplace compared to your competitors, if you're creative in your approach at the outset to building your research data set.
Yeah, I mean, and you just said what they think about your brand. And for me, that's key. It's what is their opinion of the world's opinion of you? And are they willing to stick their neck out and recommend you? Point number one. And number two, are they going to advocate for you right at the top of the funnel? So I like to think about it at the bottom of the funnel, they're the closer. When somebody searches your brand name or around your brand name, they close for you. They make the great statement that you're a superstar. In the middle of the funnel, they're recommending you above the competition. You're in that 7% that you mentioned. And at the top of the funnel, they're advocating for you.
Yeah. And I think what's really interesting about that, it was a small scale study, but Kevin Indig posted recently, which I saw, which was about something, I think he said, if I'm quoting him correctly, it was like 74% of consumers were happy with the shortlist presented by AI and didn't go elsewhere. So as long as you're in that consideration set, as long as you're shortlisted, you've got a chance. And the more times you're shortlisted across, the more lines of business and the key commercial criteria that are important to customers when they buy and when they select and choose between different brands, the more often it stands to reason, the more often you should be present, the more often your product should be present, the more often you should be cited and selected as a merchant, or you're a brand
which
or merchant.
suggests that if you get in now, you're going to create a self-fulfilling prophecy, i.e. you're going to nail down your place, and you're going to be increasingly difficult to dislodge because the machines will tend to repeat what they've already done.
I think that's always been true online. The rich always get richer, and the bigger the sites, in the old days, published more content, became more established, attracted more links, got bigger, and it's kind of snowballed. So I think it's definitely harder for new brands to build that reputation. They're not going to be in the training data for starters, so they've got to make sure that they are well indexed, and that's classic sort of SEO 101, making sure that your client's content is crawlable and can be indexed and referenced and rendered by search engines. So
one question, sorry to interrupt, is you said you're not in the training data. Would you consider that a brand not being in the training data or significantly present in the training data to be a huge disadvantage today?
Well, it clearly is a disadvantage, but it depends on the prompts and whether the large language model is using its training data and or using RAG, and whether you're present in the RAG data, the retrieval data that comes back from the indexes they're using.
So those are the two opportunities: it's being in the training data and being in the RAG data.
Yeah, I mean, I think for it's like anything else. Like for SEO, there's not one thing that gets you to the top of of Google. It's 100 small things or 1,000 small things, and so you want to be. The old golf coach I worked with called it the slight edge philosophy. It was slightly better than your competitors across as many things that count as possible. And so, yes, you want to be in the training data, but you want to be in the training data and make sure models understand you and your content and your business in the right way. And that's the key thing. There's no point in being in there if actually the interpretation of you or your business is completely at odds with what you think it should be. So so I think those fundamentals, SEO fundamentals, still remain important. That's why there's a big debate about whether there's much difference between AEO and SEO.
Yes, and one thing you said there is that the perspective that the AI has of your brand may be not what you wanted. And for me, at Kalicube, what I'm saying is create your ideal AI resume. And you need to basically force feed that to all of the engines so that they repeat your AI resume back to you or when somebody asks about your brand.
Well, I mean, I reckon you've probably been on about 100 webinars over the last decade talking about brands and how you can promote your not promote, but just how you can position your brand correctly across all the key surfaces that matter, across the Wikipedias of this world and so on and so forth. And so, you weren't called the Brand SERP Guy for nothing. So, I mean, you have knowledge in this area that's kind of second to none. So I probably defer to you in terms of your techniques and methodology for doing so. But first,
can I share a story about that?
Please
and then I'll let you finish, because I was researching Grokopedia.
Okay.
And a client of ours, James Dooley, had a page, but it said the wrong thing about him. It got him confused with a composer who's got the same name. And I was looking at Grokopedia, and I didn't have a page in Grokopedia. So I figured out how to get a page in Grokopedia, which is really not very complicated, because all you have to do is search on Grok with your name and multiple related entities that are already in Grokopedia, and it adds you within a day. That's the trick if anyone needs to do that. Brilliant. What I loved is it wrote a 2,000 word page for me, and it was better than anything I've written myself. And there was only one thing that I would have changed. Literally 2 or 3 words I would have changed. It wrote the absolutely perfect resume CV for me. And that, as you said, is because I've been working on this for 14 years.
Exactly. Yeah. So I'm not sure everyone else would have the same success immediately. But it doesn't mean that they shouldn't take steps in that direction. So I mean, you've been banging this drum for a long time, and now with the move towards conversational AI and conversational search, the benefits of building a brand, building an authentic brand, and content that supports who you are and allows third parties to independently corroborate who you are, is of paramount importance. I mean, that is SEO by any other name, but it's it's focusing on certain aspects of it, shall we say? So for me, we kind of possibly got a little bit off topic of measurement there, but in terms of action, that's what I'm saying. It's always hard to talk about measurement without thinking about your goals and your strategy and kind of what you're trying to execute, because obviously it's a circular process. You need to refine that process, and sometimes your best laid plans go awry, and sometimes they go swimmingly. So so no, I think
brilliant.
For me, there's a lot we can still do. I think there's a lot that we haven't even talked about today, like log analysis and understanding the different types of bots. And across your different websites, you may find that different large language models are, different bots are visiting you, and then also focusing on different types of pages, like store locator pages or content pages or PDPs, for example. Human Security did a little study of sort of AI agents, which I thought was quite interesting, and they've been tracking that, and it was something like 89%. I think it was January to August 2025, and it wasn't a huge study. It was like a few million sessions, if I remember correctly. But it's like 89% of AI agents were focused on product detail pages. So you can see what consumers are using this for, and you can see why, because AI models are absolutely brilliant at summarizing all the key facts for you, all the things that are commercially important, all those key criteria, and distilling other people's content for you in a way that is of really high utility for you. So I think we haven't got everything in place now. There's certainly more things that we can do: AI assisted conversions, basket size, repeat visits. There's all these type of things that people are starting to consider measuring and putting in place. But it's about getting the right foundations in right now, and thinking about this in the right way. And there are some differences between AEO and SEO in that regard.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Laurence. Thank you everyone for watching. That was brilliant. That was measurement. We went a little bit off topic, but it was super interesting. See you in the next session. Thank you.
Thanks, Jason.